Right, good evening all and welcome to our CAWASA webinar. Today, Wednesday after Carnival Day in St. Lucia, and I think all of us are still fresh out of the Carnival festivities. We'd like to welcome you back. And today we have a special guest with us who's going to speak on a topic that is quite topical for us now as we deal with the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl, which affected St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. The recovery effort is well on the way now, and we have given good support to our colleagues at the Central Water and Sewage Authority at St. Vincent, as well as the National Water and Sewage Authority in Grenada. Today we have our special guest, Mr. Alberto Burrero, who is a specialist in post-disaster events, recovery, search and rescue, etc. So I think he will share with us his experiences from the international, working on international events as a first responder, as well as sharing with us first-hand experiences and perspectives from the Caribbean. So I'd like to also take the opportunity to thank Valerie for finding this very special guest speaker for us, and to Kevin Carter of the Operators Without Borders. Welcome on board. And thank you, Mr. Burrero, for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and certainly I think this presentation comes with good timing, especially with what you guys have experienced down in the Caribbean in the last few weeks, which is obviously extremely unfortunate. And thanks to Valerie for organizing this. I hope she's recovering well. I'm amazed she's actually online listening to this, but she runs a tight ship, so she's got to make sure that I'm doing a good job here for you guys. So I'd like to share with you a little bit about what our team does in terms of response, and also how we can work with Operators Without Borders and other organizations. But first of all, just to kind of repeat what Dacia's just kind of mentioned, my name is Alberto Burrero. I'm currently a battalion chief in our Special Operations Division with the City of Vancouver Fire Department. And I'm also a task force leader on two teams. One is the Canada Task Force 1, which the fire department is the lead agency for, and we run with a multitude of other agencies, such as police, fire, ambulance, engineering. We have from the city, we also have structural engineers, geotechnical engineers, and physicians on the team as well. So that's kind of my sort of full-time position. And then alongside that, I also have a team, which hopefully all of you can see the PowerPoint right now. If you can't, please let me know. It's the Special Rescue Operations Advanced Incident Support Team, which is the logo that you see on the screen right now. And essentially, the team, the way it was created, was I looked at a lot of different organizations that had put together a multitude of urban search and rescue teams. And the premise behind our team is that we want to get there fast in order to provide reconnaissance information for folks that are coming in, so we can place them in the right positions. And that's some of the stuff I'll talk about as I go through some of the training pieces and so on and so forth in this short PowerPoint I've got for you. As well, in my background, I currently sit on the National Fire Protection Association, and I sit on the Special Operations document for technical rescue, and have for over 20 years. I've worked actually in the Caribbean, teaching occupational health and safety and rescue classes, primarily in Trinidad, Tobago, St. Kitts, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, and other places over the past 15 years. So that's a little bit about myself. What I'm thinking is, as we go through, if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. Don't worry about interrupting. I'll try to pause after each slide. And if you have any questions, by all means, fire away. Val, is there anything you want to add right now before I get started on this PowerPoint?
No, I think, and I'd just like to welcome Lorraine Lucky from CWWA, who is on the call as well. And I know that CWWA is putting together, and I'll be part of that, an emergency and safety special committee, the same as they have for wastewater and Kevin's non-revenue water. So we're going to be very pleased to work to get that up and running, and we'll see a lot more training between CWWA and CAWASA all working jointly together with OWB. Thanks, Alberto. Take it away.
Fantastic. All right, so quickly, back in 2017 in July, I was approached by a couple of different folks suggesting to me that we should put together an international response rescue team due to the number of incidents that were happening. And the fact that I speak fluent Spanish, plus I have a background in rescue over the past 30 years, I decided that I'd go ahead with that. And from there, we proceeded. So we started off, obviously, the folks that are coming to our team obviously have to fill out a society application. And with respect to the team expectations, the type of people that we take on our team, it's a little bit different makeup than probably a lot of teams that you see in the world. So we actually take people or folks that come with a specific discipline in order to support the team. And the primary reason for doing that is we want to be able to not have to spend years and years and years training people, but rather they come in with a specialty, like they're either a paramedic or they're technical search, or they have the rescue discipline or logistics or something like that. And then we cross-train everybody on the team in all of the different areas to provide the support functions. So that's kind of the premise behind the how the team is sort of initially set up. So when we started the team in July, shortly after that, in September, mid-September, late September of 2017, the earthquake in Mexico hit, and that was essentially our first deployment. And I'll talk about that as we go through the slides. So in order to fund the team, being that it's a non-for-profit team, I've had now 3 companies actually that teach specialized rescue operations, industry safety, and helicopter operations, primarily in the Americas. So I took some of the profits from that and some of the equipment, and I used it to essentially kick off the team in order to move it forward. As well, a few years after that, we managed to hook up with another not-for-profit called Holistic Emergency Preparedness and Response, and they primarily work in British Columbia up here in Canada. And most of the work that they do, about 95% of it, has to do with First Nations. So since First Nations up here doesn't have a 911 system, we figured, you know what, we could be their 911 system and work with Holistic, and they assist in providing us with insurance. They work to gather funds through the provincial and federal government to support our response in the event that we're required to respond to their land. Of course, Val and I hooked up through a mutual friend, Greg Selecki, who I'm sure a lot of you, if not all of you, probably know who he is. And we kind of hit it off right off the bat. And of course, with operators or OWB, the possibility of one day going international certainly is very important to us, because it gives the team operational experience, and certainly we want to help folks. And we really want to focus on the Americas and the Caribbean area, primarily due to proximity. However, we would go elsewhere if needed. And of course, global support development, they're currently working with OWB, and Valerie could probably tell you more about the specifics on that, how that's going. But certainly there's the potential for the 3 organizations to hopefully work together as well. And I believe GSD is doing some work right now in the Caribbean. All right, so let's look at the specifics in terms of the operations and services that we provide as a team. And the very first one, and I'll speak to it here in detail, is the incident management process. Now, why incident management? Certainly, when we arrive on scene, and remember, as I mentioned earlier, the premise behind this team is that we want to get out the door quickly and size up the situation. So once we perform a size up and we've talked to the local authority having jurisdiction or whoever's in charge, we're probably either going to get a delegation of authority and or establish command and determine what are our problems, where are they going, and how are we going to solve them. So on that note, as a team, not only can we perform the incident management function at a type 3 incident, we can also deliver a lot of that training, which is something that I know Valerie and I have spoken about in great detail, that we would certainly like to provide CAWASA with as much incident management training, ICS 100, 200, and whether the 300 or 400 come online, certainly that's something we can do. So one of the other things in terms of my background is currently I'm an incident management instructor trainer, and I'm one of 7 in Canada that can deliver the all hazards program to anybody, essentially with full certification for the folks taking the program. So hopefully down the road, we will be able to provide you with some of that training, whether it be online or whether we come down and actually do some of the training in person. Both of those are available to you. The next portion is what we call special reconnaissance, and this is primarily the key things that our team would be involved in. So once we've arrived on scene, we've sized up the multitude of the problems that are happening, and we've established command. Right away, our team of 8, which is normally what we normally operate with, would actually move into the hard-hit areas, whether it's an earthquake, a tsunami, a flood, a landslide, a massive fire, it doesn't matter what it is. And we would start to determine what are our problems and what are the hardest hit areas, and perhaps what areas specifically need specific teams, whether it be a hazardous materials team, whether it be a rescue team or whatnot, so we can get the right resource to the right area. And that kind of speeds up the process for incoming teams that are resource typed much heavier. When I say resource type, they're essentially, when we resource type, a light team would be like a type 4 or type 3, a type 2 would be like a medium, and a type 1 would be a heavy. We're not a heavy team, we're more of a light team, so we can move quickly and determine what the problems are. So that's a lot of the stuff that we do through this process called special reconnaissance, which the United Nations through INSAROG, which is the International Search and Rescue Group, is currently in the process of developing worldwide. So we run again with a minimum of 8 specialized response technicians, and these folks that are coming are basically for example, I could be there as a team lead. We'd have a critical care paramedic, a drone specialist. We would have a technical search specialist with cameras and so on. We would have a rescue specialist, perhaps a geotechnical or a structural engineer, and others like K9 within this group. And a lot of this is incident driven. So for example, if we had a landslide versus a flood, in the landslide, we would require more of a geotechnical type personnel with dogs and search cameras, as opposed to heavier on the rescue side of things. Conversely, if we're dealing with a water problem, then obviously we want to make sure we have folks that can deal with water and hazardous materials. Our technical search cameras are probably not going to be used in such an instance. It's probably going to be more of a rescue or perhaps even a recovery operation. The third thing that we can do, and how we actually determine where we're actually at in terms of whether we're going to commit ourselves as a resource to work in a specific area, a lot of that is determined as whether we have viable patients, in other words, whether they're trapped and alive, and we can actually rescue them within a 12-hour period, or if it's going to take more than 12 hours, we will request another resource, such as a type 1 urban search and rescue team, to deal with that, so we can move on and continue to recon all the areas that require, rescue operations. You can imagine, I'm sure some of you have seen this with Hurricane Beryl, you have a lot of destruction. So what we're trying to do is prioritize where we're going to send all of those resources so we can get on with it and move along a little bit quicker. The fourth thing we do is what's called PDBA, or post-damage building assessments. With that, our team, after the disaster has been sort of taken care of with respect to rescue operations or life safety, which is our priority, we can then start to perform these post-damage building assessments and determine whether people can go back to their homes, perhaps once that water has receded, or once the earthquake is over and done with. We can have a look at the building and see if maybe they can get back into it, or perhaps it's heavily damaged and requires some work, or there's no damage whatsoever. So the last thing we do is standby rescue operations. So in areas where there's been, heavy damage, or folks need to go in and do specific work after the disaster, we can be standing by as a rescue team. Organizations such as OSHA, or up here in Canada, we have WorkSafe BC, which is exactly like OSHA. They require, anytime workers are doing work in very dangerous areas, that they have a standby rescue team to provide that service in the event that they got themselves into trouble. So essentially, those are the 5 key things that our team can do. So incident management, initially, special reconnaissance, light urban search and rescue. Remember, that's within the 12-hour period if we can actually perform something there. Post-damage building assessments and standby rescue operations. Are there any questions so far as to what I've talked about? Anything? Okay, moving along. All right, so our mission statement, as I've kind of mentioned, at the beginning, we provide an initial special reconnaissance after we've established command and perform incident management setups. Damage, hazard, risk, and needs assessment. So let's determine what the problems are, how hazardous they are, associate a level of risk to all the hazards, and then from there we can determine what needs are required for that specific area. We can also perform light urban search and rescue operations, incident management, as I talked about, post-building damage assessments, and so on and so forth, of all these compromised areas. Okay. So why provide special reconnaissance? So as I mentioned earlier, we're a very unique team in the sense that, first of all, there are very few organizations and jurisdictions that can actually perform this type of function as fast as perhaps our team could. Generally, there's no municipal or provincial federal incident support reconnaissance teams worldwide. There's very, very few of these. In the United States, what they normally do is take a small component, 2 or 3 people from a FEMA urban search and rescue team to perform these duties. The problem with doing that is, if you look at point number 3, it says that our team can meet and exceed WorkSafe, and that should also be OSHA requirements for evacuation and rescue. And what we mean by that is that we can self-rescue ourselves if we get into trouble. With other teams in the world, because they only operate with 2 or 3, that's really not self-sufficient in terms of, if somebody gets injured, how are they going to deal with that? Because again, remember that responder safety and life safety come first. For those of you that have taken basic ICS, that's usually the way it goes. Moving back to point number 2, up here in Canada and the United States, certainly First Nations don't have provisions for rescue. They don't even have a 911 system. So we can be that service for them, especially in remote areas up here and in parts of British Columbia and across Canada and even in the United States. We could actually deploy there and provide for a number of different services. Our critical care paramedics, for example, are literally just below entry-level physicians. So they bring a lot of medical equipment with them. And our rescue technicians are highly trained for extractions and evacuations and so on and so forth. And that's what makes this team very, very, very unique. Talked about identifying hazards to associate level of risk. I think I already talked about that. And I also talked about the second point there, where we respond with our own built-in what's called RIT, or a rapid intervention team. So again, if something happens to one of us, we can look after ourselves. So we're bringing a fair amount of equipment, but even though we're bringing a lot of equipment, in terms of international standards, we're still traveling as a light team. In other words, we don't have massive boxes and cases of all sorts of equipment, because we're not coming in as a heavy urban search and rescue team which comes in with 226 people. We only come in with 8 of us. So again, currently this program only exists in the United States, but they certainly don't operate at the level that we do in terms of what we can and can't do. Now, in order to get our team to where it needs to be, obviously, we want to follow minimum standards. Right now, the National Fire Protection Association standards, which cover over 250 different committees, we follow those primarily in the hazardous materials area, technical rescue, medical, and so on. And the thing to keep in mind here, a lot of times when we say NFPA or National Fire, they think it's for the fire service, when in reality, the National Fire Protection Association standards primarily is for industry. The fire service only has approximately 12% representation in these standards. I happen to sit on 2 of the committees, which I'm going to talk about right now real quick. One is called NFPA 2500, and the other one is NFPA 1006. These are consensus standards that have been developed by subject matter experts. Up here in Canada and the United States, they've been adopted by the Fire Services Act, as well as OSHA, WorkSafe BC up here, the Canadian Standards Association, all use the NFPA standards. So does our medical licensing board up here, and we can provide medical care internationally pretty much anywhere in the world. And really important is that all of these standards are defendable in a court of law. So the NFPA 2500 standard, essentially, without getting into a very detailed explanation, this standard is for the organization. So if we responded to, I don't know, Jamaica, for example, their fire service there, or the police, or their paramedics, folks in industry, they could use this standard as a minimum standard to develop their levels of training in specialized rescue operations. Now, within the organization, there are 3 levels of training that are delineated. The first one is awareness, then operations, and then technician. Essentially, the difference between the 3, I'll use the incident command system training. If I was to put on a 100 ICS course online, that would essentially be an awareness level. Once we get into the, the 2, 3, primarily the 300, 400 level classes, now you're getting into operational level, where you're practically actually doing things to perform activities. And then, of course, the technician level, which is the highest level, where you're essentially getting ready to have the ability to direct work and act in a supervisory position. Okay, so these would be the minimum levels as an organization that have to be set out. Now, for the individual, right, if the organization is accredited, we want to be able to certify the individual. So that certification, normally we have a third party like the Board of Professional Qualifications or the International Standards of Fire Service Accreditation come in. And again, for each individual, there's an awareness, operations, and technician level that they get tested to. So normally it's some sort of a written quiz. Sometimes there's performance expectations that they would have to do in order to get their certification. All right, real quick here, I just want to give you a quick overview of our team in terms of there are 30 modules that these folks go through, and it takes about 5 years to do all this training on top of the specialty that they bring to the team. So we start them off with module 1, which is an introduction to technical rescue awareness or special operations. They learn all of the standards and regulatory stuff that they need to know. Then we talk about USAR special operations in terms of incidents that have occurred all over the world, all hazards. Again, floods, fires, tornadoes, tsunamis, earthquakes, and so on. Then we get into the causes, types of structural collapses, the structural engineering portion, which is taught by our structural engineers or geotechnical. We talk about global events, structural collapse hazards, instability, everything from safety, security, survival, and liability, because obviously prior to deployment, we need to make sure that our first course of action is making sure that the team is safe, because obviously we won't be able to do anything if we're going to have safety issues. Like, for example, when I deployed to Haiti years ago, obviously we weren't able to do a whole lot just because of the instability of the situation. Personal protective equipment, team equipment, and with respect to the team equipment, every person on the team carries different parts of this team equipment component. Myself as a team leader, I would carry things like laptops and incident management, briefing forms, and so on and so forth. Whereas a medic obviously is going to pack his or her medical equipment all the way to the critical care paramedic level. So it varies for sure. We train them in all the different team positions, right? So if I'm not there, somebody else can step in and do that specific job. They get all the way up to ICS 400 level, and now I'm training them in specific position training. So if we want them to learn how to become a task force leader or a strike team leader or a division or group supervisor or an operations section chief or branch director, they eventually will get that training as well. All right, so quickly in these modules, you can see there's team deployment operations they get training on. Special reconnaissance, module 13, is the meat and potatoes of what we do. So we use the INSROG standards, and they learn how to search buildings, search areas, stabilize those areas, how to evacuate personnel. They learn international marking systems, all sorts of things. Search operations with cameras and DELSAR units to detect where people may be located. We actually are talking with the Israelis right now about a new radar system that they're using. It's an extremely expensive system, but you can detect heartbeat and movement of lungs underneath rubble. So that's far better, far more advanced than the technology we have right now, which is a dog and a camera trying to find a human being that's trapped under rubble, where there's so much debris, it's difficult to find. So the technology is getting better. Then from there, we move in the technical rescue operation. So rope, confined space, trench, collapse. There's a whole pile of different technical rescue training, all the way down to helicopter, water operations, medical, hazardous materials, whether it's in water, whether it's in buildings, all of those things need to be trained in. We also do a component on what's called CBRNE, which is chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosives awareness for the entire team. Unfortunately, we live in a world now where things are changing. I know OWB has done some training in Europe with respect to what's happening now in Ukraine. So it's obviously good to have this sort of background, at least to an awareness level within this whole thing. After they've done all these 29 modules of training, we give them a final written with proficiency skills training and deployment operations, where they will go somewhere for at least a week to 10 days. And we will actually perform all hazards at that deployment. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, all of that training. All right. Any questions on any of the training that we do? Very well. All right, moving along. This is a shot of a special reconnaissance operation in 2017 that I did. You can see me on the left there in orange. I'm talking to a couple of engineers and some other workers from other teams. And we would go in there and determine the risks, or pardon me, the hazards, and then the risks associated to all of the hazards we're finding, and then determine the needs in terms of how we need to actually start and what areas we're going to actually penetrate into these buildings. This was before a 6-story school. Unfortunately, at this particular event, I spent 4 nights out of the 10 I was there. We removed 69 bodies out of here. Only a couple survived, unfortunately. So as you can see at the very bottom of this building, 286, you can see all these sticks that are underneath. The folks that were there that didn't have any training whatsoever did what they thought was best, which is try to support the structure from the bottom. They had the right concept. Unfortunately, this wasn't strong enough. So as you can see in the picture on the right-hand side, we started to bring in air struts, which is that red vertical component you see there, in order to support parts of the building, because the connection points where the floor met the walls weren't built properly, and unfortunately that building suffered a massive what's called a pancake collapse. So during the day, again, you can obviously see me there in the red. I'm talking to different crews that I'm trying to teach them through an assistant of mine how to build double T-spot shores to stabilize the building, which I'll try to show you a couple of close-ups of what we did there. So again, we follow very strict forms of building these things. They have to be the right size lumber. There's a nailing pattern and so on and so forth that goes with it. So as you can see on the right-hand side, inside the building, you see the lumber that's up against the ceiling there. That's called a header. And then the post is the actual strut in red and silver that you see there. And then on the bottom, on the floor, we have what's called a sole plate. And that's the way we formulate essentially a shoring system to create holes in the building to extract people out. On the left-hand side, you can see teams. I had about 6 or 7 teams from different parts of the world: Spain, Israel, Argentina, Mexico, and others. What team from LA County that were reporting to me that night when I was running the incident. And the Spanish team in red there, their job was to do technical search initially to see if we could find viable patients. So that's them on the top side of the building. All right, there's another shot on the left from the outside of one of the buildings. That's we call that getting racked. And anytime, if you see on the green columns of the building, you can see these X cracks everywhere. That means that building's kind of shifted side to side, but we do manage to get in there safely with dogs and the right folks, and we'll recon the area and see if we can find viable patients or folks that are trapped and determine whether we can actually get them out. Kind of like the picture you can see on the right, which is the inside of that structure you're looking at on the left. Okay. One of the things in Mexico with the liquefaction, a lot of the buildings would compress down and twist because Mexico City is built on a lake. So that caused a lot of problems, obviously, for the rescuers when we were working there. Again, we can also attend hazardous materials incidents, whether it be on ships, boats, doesn't matter where they are in the water. We work with another group called Nucor, which specializes in hazardous materials. So certainly some of those folks could join us, pardon me, if required. I attended the Pentagon well after in looking at post-building damage assessment work. But as far as 9/11, I was in New York City for 10 days right after it happened. But this picture here, which I wasn't there, but as you can see, they evacuated a lot of people very quickly. But with the amount of debris that folks were hit by, there certainly was a lot of injuries that they had to triage on the outside lawn of the Pentagon where it got hit. So a lot of the injuries that we deal with are obviously of the crush syndrome nature, which our paramedics are very well trained in. So they can start to, we can start to stabilize the area, support it, and we can get bicarbs and all sorts of other medicine into these people. Because a lot of times, if we don't do that, when you take those heavy pieces of concrete or steel or whatever it's pinned on the human body, as soon as you lift it off of them, unfortunately, all that bad blood that's within their system that's been trapped will move into their heart and brain, and they will die fairly quickly, which is very difficult to certainly deal with. So we try as best as possible to stabilize them prior to getting them out. So again, our rapid advance life support paramedics, our critical care paramedics, they can pretty much work in any terrain, and with the use of helicopters, boats, vehicles, we can quickly move them out of the area if we have that resource to assist. You're looking at a picture here. This time I went from my red back to my orange jacket there. This is night operations as an ops section chief. I was working with the incident commander, who's the fellow in the white. And we're going over plans, and the folks around us are structural engineers, crane operators, and so on. And we're coming up with the night operations, we're in the process of getting the incident action plan for the night operations enacted on. So that's usually built by the day team and then sent over to us, and then we would build out the day operations at night. So when they show up and take over from us, they would have their plan ready to go. So this is essentially an example here of our specific team, how we would kind of deploy, or administratively how our folks sit. And again, all of these positions are interchangeable depending on what's driving the incident. In other words, if it's primarily a water incident, you may see some of these positions would be different, as opposed to if it was a fire, a flood, hurricane, a landslide. So all right, I'm going to quickly show you some incidents here that we've had here in Canada. These are some of the ones, actually all of these that I've responded to, where I was an operations section chief and got to manage. Some of them were as long as a month, and others we were only there for one operational period. So the first one here, this is in Calgary, Canada, province of Alberta, back in 2013, I believe it was. We had a massive flood. The city of Calgary was about 6-7 feet underwater, and our primary function was to go in there and provide special reconnaissance and urban search and rescue operations for the city there. So that took, we were there within 5 days. Most of that water had receded, and we searched a lot of the high rises that you see in the background there, where the basements were flooded and there's cars in there. So we had to search for missing people. Along the Bow River, there was a lot of fishermen and homeless folks that were unfortunately had drowned that we had to retrieve. But all in all, we actually, I think it was a fairly successful operation because we rescued a lot of folks. This is a crane collapse, a tower crane, which is used to build high rises up here in Canada. As the ops section chief, you can see me there on the left. The team is actually right behind me, and we're performing a recon of the area real quick. This crane was on approximately a 30-story building, and they were trying to take the crane down. So they would lift it with hydraulic jacks and then remove a section of the crane, lower it back down. Unfortunately, there were some mistakes made, and the whole thing came down at approximately 100 miles an hour. It killed 6 people. We had to come in and retrieve the bodies that were crushed, and you can see them on the right-hand side of the building where the crane came down, part of the building. That's one part that got crushed, where we removed a couple of office workers. And on the left-hand picture there, you can see kind of the top side of it, but most of the damage and debris and folks that were missing were down below. There's a better shot on the left, bottom left-hand corner from the top side of the hole. We have our crane operator, our structural engineer. One of my squad leads is laying down, having a closer look. I had 2 squads that were set up for this particular operation, and we managed to get everybody out in less than 1 operational period. So in 7 hours, we took everybody out. So the local resources there, the fire department, unfortunately don't have the specific training or the equipment, so they brought in our team to perform these duties. This is a theater collapse that I went to, again, as an ops section chief, running our team. This one, same thing, 1 operational period. You can probably see in the bottom a bit of a, kind of like a blue blanket on the ground there, where we had multiple fatalities. We had to cut away a lot of this building and all of the corrugated steel and the floor that had come down from a machine. I can see at the very, very top, they were chipping away at the floor and putting all of the material back onto the building, which caused even more weight and pressure, which led to the collapse of this building, killing a few workers. These are shots of a slide that we had in the city of Agassiz here in British Columbia. On the left, this massive slide came down and it's covering the road. On this particular one, with helicopters, 3 of them from the military, we rescued 269 people off of this particular slide. There was 3 sections of the freeway that were covered in debris, logs, and everything else. And you can see on the right-hand side some of the vehicles in terms of how crushed they are. We had to send teams in there, very unstable area. When we got there at night, there were still a lot of flooded areas in there, so it was very dangerous work for sure. And on the top right-hand corner, you can see the team doing, this is once the water had receded, we're doing a final sweep of the area to make sure we've got everybody. The next one, after we finished that landslide, we were on our way home and we got rerouted. The chief from the city called me up and said, hey, listen, the team's got to go back to work. So we'd been up already for 3-4 days. And that night at 11 o'clock on our way home, we got rerouted. And this is what we were presented with, which is the Abbotsford floods up here. This is something that certainly you probably saw with Hurricane Beryl, at least in portions of the Caribbean islands. So we had our little sort of, not a hurricane, but just a massive flood in this particular area. In November here in BC is usually our rainy season. So we get a ton, sometimes 150 millimeters of rain in a day. So this pretty much flooded. This used to be a lake. Now it's all residential homes, and we searched over 4,000 homes in 3.5 weeks. So that is a ton of work, as you can imagine. We did establish command there as well. We ran the ICS system. I established a search and rescue branch there, and my boss would talk directly to the incident command post and the emergency operations center. So some of the things here real quick. I know we've only got about 15 minutes. These are some of the homes you could see when they were all flooded, and you can see the water was as high as that window. You can't see all of these pits where rescue workers can get themselves into trouble. So again, it requires specialized equipment, a lot of training, and making sure that we keep on top of things and we don't get ourselves into trouble. So I had 7 squads, and in each squad there was 2 teams. So I literally had hundreds of people in the field that I was managing for close to a month during this whole incident. So this is a close-up shot of some of the areas that we would walk ourselves into that we couldn't see because the area was flooded. Once the water receded, you can see on the bottom 2 pictures, the basement. This is a basement of a home that suffered extensive damage, but we had to go in there and search because, believe it or not, what you're looking at there is a basement of a home. People lived in this area, but with all the shifting of the columns and beams and all of the rock, everything was very turbulent and it completely destroyed it. But since we had missing people, we had to search those entire areas with dogs and cameras, and that just took an awful lot of time. This here is in the province of Manitoba. Again, another flood, another deployment, people trapped in areas. Usually when we get there, and when we got to Abbotsford, which is this particular incident I was talking about, let's just go back real quick. Initially, when we got there, if you look at the left-hand side picture, we would come in with helicopters and boats and rescue as many people as possible on the roof of homes. And then subsequent to that, once the water receded, then we actually would get into the homes and actually check to make sure that nobody else was trapped that could be saved. All right, these are pictures of post-damage building assessments we did here in the central part of British Columbia, again in Cache Creek, a little city, a little town, I should say. They suffered a massive flood that took out pretty much 3/4 of the town. So we went in and made sure that areas after the flood could be either that folks could actually go back to their homes and actually get back into the business of cleaning up and moving forward, or putting up restricted placards suggesting that further inspection by a structural engineer and or a restoration company would determine how long it would be before they could actually get back into their homes. Probably, I'm assuming, some of the things that are going on in some of the islands right now in the Caribbean where you folks are at. Of course, I mentioned earlier at the start of this program, I spent 10 days right off the bat at the World Trade Center. I started off, I went there with Chicago. I was actually in Chicago when this happened. I was actually doing some rescue training, believe it or not, and then this happened. So there was no flights to get back home. So my fire chief said, put him to work. And off I went to New York City. I started on night operations for 4 nights, and then 4 days, and another, I think, 3 days after that before I was finally able to catch a flight home with Air Canada after this whole thing. I used to train and teach with a lot of the fellas that attended this incident. Unfortunately, all of them but one lost their lives that day. So we all know about the devastations in New York. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this at all. Here's a shot of the Pentagon on the left there. Again, friends of mine that attended this scene as well. They certainly had more of an actual collapse in terms of shoring to do, as you can tell by the picture on the right-hand side. They're using columns, so 3 air struts. So those in red and silver, those are called air struts from airshore. And they would, pardon me, not myself, but they would support the columns and beams that are in that building. So as they would penetrate every 4 feet, they would have to shore up the building, and then they would use lumber. And if you look on the left-hand side, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse down here, but there's a bunch of what's called cribbing to support the corner of this building so it doesn't collapse. And they would build these towers that are approximately 10 feet, 12 feet high, all along through here, the base of the building, in order to support it once the fires were put out. This is a bridge collapse in Minneapolis. Again, number of folks were killed. Multi-agency jurisdiction, the Coast Guard, fire department, urban search and rescue teams, the military. So again, you're working with lots of folks to deal with rescue operations above ground and below. You can't see the actual, this is towards the end of it, so you can't see the actual river in terms of what the bridge is crossing. I guess just quickly, the personal protective equipment that we use in a nutshell is incident dependent. So if we're going to a water incident versus a structural collapse incident versus a mudslide, it requires specific, pieces of equipment for each and every one of those types of incidents. This is a shot of Mexico City. You can see in the background these boxes that you saw earlier in the PowerPoint presentation. These are called lace post boxes. We put them up every 4 feet in order to stabilize the building and also have a safe area of refuge in the event that that building shifts due to an aftershock or an intentional device perhaps that's put into the building, like an explosion or something like that. Team equipment, oh God, there's so much team equipment required for what we do because, again, we respond to an all hazards type of events. So there's just a multitude of equipment that we have to have with us. Locally here in Vancouver, Canada, I live in the city of Langley, and that's where our team's based out of. There's a couple of helicopter companies that we use. One of them is called Contour, that has 3 Black Hawk helicopters, and TRK Helicopters runs a number of other heavy lift transport helicopters like 412s and 212s. So we essentially could move anywhere within the province of British Columbia, and it's a massive province. Within 4 hours, we can be anywhere in this province fairly quickly. And we've had explosions in mills in the northern part of British Columbia. We've had collapses and things like that, where my urban search and team has responded to, but my current not-for-profit team, at this point, we haven't responded to any major collapses, at least in the British Columbia area. We can also support non-governmental organizations, medical teams and rescue teams, also international NGOs, right? I mean, like GSD would be one of them. Certainly OWB would be considered, I believe, an international NGO, even though they're based here in Canada. They also have bases in Australia and and they have support in the United States with other organizations. Valerie could certainly speak more to that than I could. Here in Canada, we could support the 5 urban search and rescue teams that are located in different provinces, depending on population size. That's usually where you find the teams like Manitoba, Calgary, Toronto, Nova Scotia. We also have one in Quebec and Montreal now, and of course, Vancouver's team, which is in the far left of the picture there. We can support teams in the United States. There's 28 urban search and rescue teams. During the time when we went to Mexico City in 2017, they actually initially asked us to come down to Destin, Florida, to support operations down there. We were requested by their state officials, and we decided that it was more critical for us to go to Mexico because they didn't have as many resources. Urban search and rescue teams internationally, we can certainly support them in a variety of different ways, whether we get there first or after the fact. If we were to get there after the fact, again, our folks are trained in urban search and rescue, structural collapse. So we could certainly be embedded within their team and provide certain functions like technical search with cameras, canine, medical, and of course, rescue or incident management. All right, I talked about all the training that we do. There's a whole variety of it right there. So everything from drone operations, we talked about technical and canine, hazardous materials, medical, and all of the technical rescue disciplines, rope, confined space, trench, tunnel and mines, structural collapse, and real important, this rapid intervention. Again, if anything happens to us or anybody else, we are there to hopefully support that team member and extract them and get them to medical aid as quickly as possible if they are injured. Incident management, of course, is another big one. There's a lot of organizations we show up to that are smaller agencies or smaller entities, and they don't have the ability or the training to do that. So we come in and we support. They take or keep command of their area, and we're just there to fill in the holes that they need, or we can walk them through the process if they need us to do so. So the training for us, obviously, it's ongoing, nonstop. These are post-building damage assessments that we were doing at a First Nations area. We use homes that are about to be torn down, and we try to basically get to the point where we can do a structure within 15 minutes and then move on to the next one, and the next one after that. And that's extremely difficult with the amount of paperwork, photographs, dogs have to go in, cameras have to go in, squad leaders have to make decisions based on what they're seeing, how dangerous the environment outside is, all of the hazardous materials, whether it's gas, whether it's electricity, whether it's water. So 15 minutes is extremely difficult, but that's what we try to shoot for, because remember, we're looking at big picture in a large disaster area. And finally, well, it's 3 minutes to 2, which is 3 minutes to, I believe, 5 on your end. I'll conclude by saying that we talked about this earlier, the final testing and deployment operational exercises that we do. The next one we're hoping for is in South America, and we would work with other teams down there. Certainly, if you folks would invite us to come down to the Caribbean, we would love to come down and join you to do some joint training. I'm sure Valerie's probably mentioned this on several occasions, but certainly we're here for you. We want to work with you, and hopefully at some point, perhaps through delivery of training and or coming down to exercise in an area that could be very beneficial for us, we get an opportunity to do so. So in conclusion, here's what I always say: train your mind to push your body well beyond what you think it's capable of doing. And I use this with my team when I train them, because the human body can do 7 times more than what you think it can. So when you think you're tired, you can actually push yourself 7 times more. So that's kind of our motto. So get comfortable being uncomfortable. And with that, I will turn it over back to you folks and see if anybody has any questions.
Alberto, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what you and I had talked about the next steps because a lot of the folks on this call have probably already been through ICS 1, maybe 200, some maybe even 300. But you and I talked about actually what would be of most use is to, once they've been through a 200,
Yep.
to do them training to be a specific project within the water section. Could you just go tell a little bit about that? What we're
Yeah. So what Val's talking about is, generally speaking, in the world of incident management, 99% of the folks out there will say, well, I've got my ICS 1, 2, some folks even 3, and a few others will have a 400 level, which is high level. But really what that means is that you're painting the incident management with a broad brush. In other words, you don't know how to do your specific job to be an incident commander or command staff position, which could be a liaison officer, an information officer, or a safety officer. And within the operations sections, primarily, because normally we build the operations section from the bottom up. So in order to do that, to be a resource unit leader, a task force leader, a strike team leader, a division supervisor or a group supervisor, and a branch director, all the way up to operations section chief, all of these positions require specific training in order for you to have the ability to direct on the ground the things that need to be accomplished. And you certainly can't just do that with ICS 1, 2, 3, and 400, because again, that's a wide scale set of skills that the instructor's giving you, but he's not telling you exactly how to do your job specifically on the ground. Hopefully that makes sense. And if there's any questions on that, I'm happy to expand on it, or even give Valerie some more information on that she can pass on to you folks. But I think that kind of training would be invaluable because, the information that we gather on the ground, without that specific training in terms of how to record it, how to look for those specific hazards, how to lead people through that type of environment, is something that's obviously critical to a safe operation.
Thank you.
Right, thank you, Alberto. That was fantastic. I think you could see by the numbers we have, we seem to have caused quite a bit of people to join us this afternoon. So the floor is open to you. Some of you who have joined us for the first time, please feel free to ask any questions you have at this point.
Somebody must have a question.
While we wait, Alberto, what sort of, I know you must have, for at least I know you said about the ICS 100, etc. But specifically, what sort of some of the basic qualification one would need to have to be able to undertake that type of training?
So within the ICS 100, for example, that's the base level training. So there are no prerequisites for that. Once you get into the 200 level, obviously you should have the ICS 100 level. If you have the ability to apply some of these skills in the real world, whether it's through exercising or whether it's your job to do some of these things, that's certainly going to be beneficial when you start doing the specific programs training. In other words, becoming a task force leader or a strike team leader.
Okay.
Kevin Carter.
Kevin first, and then we will have Lorraine. Go ahead, Kevin.
All right, thanks. First of all, thank you for your service to humanity. I mean, what an impressive work. And thanks for a great presentation. Hopefully you're already starting your books, because I know they would be a quick read. I'm going to ask you, it's sort of a technical application that I saw a presentation last fall. And now that I have somebody's first in, this is the question. They had took camera footage from a helicopter or a drone, brought it back, and the utility or the water company was able to take those initial looks of the damage assessment. And in this case, they had a GIS application, or you could use your hard copies. Have you worked with and seen anything like this, where while you're obviously doing search and rescue for human beings, you could also be gathering information for the sectors that are going to come in a little later?
So really good question, Kevin. And yes, To answer your question, anytime we have resources that we call technical specialists within the planning section of the incident command system, plan section chief has what I call RSDDT. So resource unit leader, situation, documentation, demobilization, and technical specialists. Within the technical specialists and the situation where the GIS is located, we would place those folks in there. So say, for example, going back to the landslide, the pictures that I showed you that took out that freeway, we had folks from the Ministry of Transportation trying to clear the road right away because traffic to them is the priority. It's not my priority. Life safety is my priority. But because it's their priority, I took one of their one of their superintendents, and I put him in technical specialists. And he said, we need to take a look at this, and I want to have my drone go up and do that. And I said, well, tell you what, we're going up with our helicopter. I'll get you what information you need. And then once we get back down, if you need more specific information, you can get your drone up there, and then we'll keep you in the planning section. And then from there, after he's done his initial work and he needs to see more in-depth stuff, I'll take him and put him in the operations section, and he'll work within the division. So a division supervisor would be there managing the operation, perhaps where he needs to do electrical work or whatever. And he would just report to that person and then report to me. So yes, it does happen, and it's definitely a good way of doing business, because now we're accomplishing multiple things at the same time.
Yeah, and for the water utility company, we're able to start prioritizing where we want to go first. So great.
100%.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the beauty of that too is that you can actually get your water, which is the most critical thing when you think about it on this earth. You know, it's one of those things we want to put right after life safety is like, we need water. So we could get moving on that very quickly. Good question.
Yeah, we have Lauren Lucky, who is the Executive Director of the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association. Over to you, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Alberto. Thank you for that very informative presentation, and thanks to Ignatius and the CAWASA team for bringing this to the Caribbean, of course, supported by Valerie. I think this, I don't even have to say it's timely, but it's also very, very relevant. My question really goes back to the ICS. I know some of these types of training, refresher course is usually advised. Do you advise a refresher course? For instance, let's say a utility participated in the training in, let's say, 2020. Is there a time period that they should do a refresher if they haven't, or anything like that?
Very good question. In fact, I currently sit on an advisory group up here in British Columbia right now that's trying to strengthen the incident management standards, first of all in our province, and then hopefully it'll be adopted right across the nation. Now, one of the things I put together about 3 months ago is the ability, and because I sit on the National Fire Protection Association Committee, I mentioned to you guys earlier, one of the things we do in there is we stress the fact that you need to have proficiency quarterly evaluations or quarterly proficiency training or exercises. Essentially what that means is that if you're not doing some of this in one form or another, every 3 months, you're probably going to forget over 50% of what you've been trained in, because these are perishable skills. So my suggestion to you is, one, you can either take the course, if it's a 100, it's, you can do it online or free, or if you have the ability to get together with a group and exercise, that would certainly be, I would say, the best way to keep up your skills is to exercise. And then, of course, if you're doing it in the real world, that's just the very best right there. So again, quarterly proficiency training, if possible, at the very least, read through your PowerPoint or books. And then after that, if you're not able to do that quarterly proficiency training, I would definitely try to, every year, try to take the class. Does that answer your question?
We do have
Thank you. Yes.
With CWWA and CAWASA, September 10th doing another level 100. So if you haven't taken it before, or you want to take it again, just for knowledge, that will be coming, Lorraine, September 10th, I think we have.
Yeah, yes, we will be executing that program in that training, the level 100 in on September 10th in collaboration with CAWASA.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic. But in addition to this, I think, well, we'll not do that on this call, but perhaps more of some bilaterals, maybe ourselves and CWWA and Valerie and yourself, to see how we can. I think this type of training, it's useful, yes, to do the virtual training, but I think what we really need to drill down to is to get really hands-on,
Yes,
situational type. And the big challenge for us usually is to try to find the financing to bring the teams down to the Caribbean, to do that. So it's maybe something that we can try to projectize and see which some of our external donors would be able to give us that type of support. But as I say, we'll discuss it behind the scenes. I was also trying to find out, since we are dealing with these matters, so what, for example, say we in the Caribbean, although we have the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Agency, but outside of that, if, let us say there's a situation, and what would trigger some sort of response or intervention by yourselves?
So to answer your question, and it's pretty much the same all over the world, the LEMA, so the LEMA, the Local Emergency Management Agency,
Right.
which is your authority having jurisdiction, as soon as they put in a request and they say that we want this resource down here, as in our team, that gives us a green light to come down there. It's as simple as that. And that can be requested through, it's usually best if it's requested through the federal government, but even depending on your jurisdictions, a lot of times states, like the state of Louisiana requested, that's one of the things that I didn't put on the PowerPoint, during the floods in 2005, we were requested by the state governor to go down there, and the federal government had no jurisdiction. So we went and off we went and did business during those floods. So, but really we need to have somebody who's in charge locally to say, we want this resource. And then from there, things can start moving.
Right.
I'm just thinking of how useful your team would have been in somewhere like Abaco after Hurricane Dorian, because there was a huge, they don't even know how many people were lost. And that organization that a team like yours brings would have been, I think, invaluable.
The thing to realize with all this, and it's so hard to convince government anywhere in the world, is when something like this happens, the only people that sort of are sort of set up right now who do it very well is the United States. In other words, they know Hurricane Beryl's coming, and they pre-position 10 teams 3 days before it gets here, and then as soon as it hits, they're already out the door. So if we know something like this is happening and we can pre-position things, and one of the I think it was Kevin that said, about with respect to me writing a book. Well, one of the manuals that I wrote, I call it the 7 P's to live by, and it's proper pre-planning prevents piss poor performance. So if we can pre-plan in advance or plan in advance, and I realize sometimes with earthquakes, you can't do that because they just hit, but we need to get out the door much faster and convince folks that a resource is needed on the ground to determine what are the problems, where are they going, and how do we solve them initially? Because if you don't do that right away, it really slows down this whole process. And now we start sending resources or bigger resources to areas that perhaps aren't really required there.
And that's one of the reasons I'm excited about, working with GSD as well. In fact, Krista from GSD, Ignatius, is in Toronto right now. We are hosting her to look at all of our labs because we're setting up the lab with GSD on their boat. So she's taking a look at our labs, and Ian and Janine from OWB and the region of Durham are hosting her and showing around, and then they're going to be coming down and equipping the boat. So we're building these relationships that I think should be really helpful for the whole of the Caribbean as we go forward.
Yeah, very useful. As you just mentioned, Alberto, that you have some writings called the 7 Ps to live by. Sounds like an interesting read. If that should be available, you can let me know where we can acquire this material.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll be in touch,
Yeah.
you know,
To
in
follow this,
the
yeah.
months and
Okay.
weeks and so on and so forth. And I just thank you very much for having me today. Really, truly appreciate it. Certainly the Caribbean it has a special place in my heart because I spent a lot of years. I was actually born in northern Spain and raised in Liberia, West Africa. And I spent, you know, obviously the last part of my life here in Canada, but I've traveled all over the world. But I spent 6, 7 years doing a lot of teaching down there, and I absolutely love it down there. So thanks to Val for, you know, for making all this happen. She's relentless on me to make sure that we carry on with with this good work. And so I just very thankful that you guys would have me here today.
Right. Thank you so much, Alberto, and thank you, Valerie. Get well soon. Thank all of you who have joined us this afternoon for CAWASA Wednesday webinar number 18 of our 2024 series. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good evening, all. Thank you again, Alberto Burrero.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you.
Alberto,
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
You're well.
Thank you.